Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and today this video is sponsored by Zenith Studios. This is a Patreon over on Patreon, but I'll tell you a little bit more about them later in the video. For now, let's get into painting this Lara craft that they have created for this month's releases. Now, as you know, I have been working on improving my studio, mostly giving it a new lick of paint, and I also put these new lights in so that I can actually see a little bit better, but it also makes the lighting in here look a lot better, which is good. Better is always good. I'm pretty sure that is the way things work. Now, I need to get this model done, but I will mention to you that we are currently on Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm starting this, which has to be out by Thursday. By the way, I have a load of other things that I need to do, which needs to be done by Sunday, so let's just shut up and do this thing, shall we? Now, I supported this model myself. This is because I have control over where I want the supports to be, and this model has not been cleaned up yet, so you can already tell that it's not too much work to do. But if we look at something like the arm, there is a little bit of cleanup to do over there, but I mostly hide all of my support marks in places that you can't really see them. So this leaves me a lot less work to do at the end, and it makes my life a little bit easier in order for the cleanup which needs to happen next, so that I can get on a layer of primer. You know what, if none of this makes sense, I don't even care. I've mentioned these before, but these are basically abrasive sanding disc things that you use for metal and jewelry making stuff. Well, at least that's where I found them, but recently I was given some of them in a Formlabs package, and basically that means that it is for 3D printing too, and it is honestly one of those little battery-powered Dremel tool things with one of those sanding things. Dude, you will change your life. It'll be so much easier to do preparation. Now, I want to quickly talk about my priming situation. I have moved away from Citadel for the moment, and I'm specifically only using the Kaleido primer. This is because it is a little bit less messy, and it is a whole lot less expensive for me. And so I'm attempting to use this for a while until it either makes me angry or it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But for now, it is doing it. Now, on this base, there is a little piece of water between the two base sections. And what I did for this was only painted blue on the bottom of it, and then I sprayed a gloss clear over the top to make it look nice and shiny like water is. Now, as you can see, this is how I dry all my parts. I hang them in as many weird places as I can. This is just mostly due to trying to find a space to dry parts, especially a model like this, which is cut into so many different parts, which, by the way, is a great thing because this helps you to paint the model a lot easier. All the little bits being separated makes it easier to handle, I guess, all the little bits. Now, I'm going to also be using a primer to do any of my zenith filling at this point, and this is a new thing as well. It has pretty much come up the last, I would say, 4 or 5 videos where I just haven't been using ink, again because of the cost of it. It's so expensive to use ink. It's not the end of the world, but it does cost a lot of money, and the primer is a little bit cheaper to use in its place. Now, obviously, I primed a lot of these parts, and then I sprayed on the colors that they needed to be. For example, the boots and the pants, I sprayed them with a brown, and in order to reinforce the shadows with them, I just sprayed a contrast brown into those shadows. This made the brown a little bit darker, but of course not the correct color for the boots, so to change the color, I used a bit of Mornfang brown over the top of them, just coming from the highlight areas. Here you can see me using this primer for a zenithal, and you would be saying, well, it comes out quite smooth, doesn't it? Well, yes, that's because this specific primer is already formulated to go through your airbrush easy. That means no thinning, no adding anything. I literally spray it out my airbrush with nothing additional to it, and it is smooth enough for me in most situations. Due to the time constraints I have set upon myself for making videos, I decided that the skin tones on this model are going to have to be a little bit less complicated than they normally are, and I felt like I could maybe get away with just spraying a couple of skin tones with a bit of orcish dermis to give us some skin look. And I'll be honest, it wasn't quite perfect, but we will revisit this a little bit later on. I need to prepare the glasses because I'm going to be painting them later, and to prepare them I sprayed a red ink over them and put a gloss clear and left them to dry for the next day or so before I did anything else to them. And working on the base was pretty simple. I just needed to make sure that there were different types of browns. Basically, there is a tree trunk and there is roots and things, and there's also ground and rocky ground kind of stuff. So you need to make sure that they look different, because if they're the same browns, it's going to look like the same thing and it's not going to look different, which is obviously what you're trying to achieve here. But you can see me using different highlight colors to make sure that each part stands out differently, and I'm making sure not to let any of those highlight areas bleed into each other. There's technically actually 3 different colors on this base, although these little Aztec ruin section thingies, they are very similar to the ground in color, but they're not quite the same color. And in order to really push the highlights on them, I use some deck tan to make sure that the highlights are really bright and it doesn't look exactly like the rest of the ground, otherwise it would look a bit weird. But you can also see me using a bit of Reichland Flesh Shade to spray into the shadows of those pieces. And then on the base section I'm using Agrax Earthshade. Agrax is more brown, a little bit darker brown, and the Reichland Flesh Shade is a little bit more redder, a little bit more orangey kind of color. So this does help, even though it's a minute change to your eye, it does help in changing the color of these parts from each other. I also use just a little bit of green wash to spray over the base sections as well, to kind of simulate a little bit of like moss and things like that may be on the jungle floor, whatever the case is. And speaking of the jungle floor, I also had to paint about 480,000 leaves that were on this base. I could have done this a little bit more complex, but I figured just a simple green would work out quite well. I don't really know if green leaves fall off of trees, but maybe they do if they've been whacked off of the trees by something huge, which she might be fine. I don't know the story. I just know that I have to paint this model and make a video about it, and people need to watch it, and that is what I am doing. Also, speaking of what I'm doing, I'm going to quickly glue these 2 parts of the base together, because these 2 parts don't necessarily need to come apart, and they would probably be able to be moved fairly easy as one unit. Now on the base there is a couple of animals. One of them is a frog, and it's obviously a poison dart frog, I think. So, either way, it's blue. And so to paint this blue, I used the dark blue and a light blue. I painted the dark blue wet at first, and then I wet blended, which is basically taking the light blue while the dark blue is still wet and kind of like slapping the brush around it. And when you do this, it creates a smooth little blend between the two, making it look like you know what you're doing. And people think that you know how to paint if you do stuff like that, apparently. Next step is to paint the little bushes that go into the base, and those you saw me paint earlier, they were really easy. I just literally zenithalled them and I sprayed green contrast paint over the top, and I put them aside to dry and moved on to other things, like for example painting the setup for later, which is to put the blue onto the little arrows that are in a pocket on the back of a, what the heck is the arrow thing called? It doesn't matter. Let's just move on to the skin tones, where I decided I needed to bring a little bit more yellow into the skins, because they just didn't look right. So I used basic skin tone to go over all the highlighted areas and kind of soften out some of that redness that I'd created with the orcish dermis. Now while that dried, I moved on to painting the boots, and on the boots there are these like sock. I'm pretty sure it's a sock. It has to be a sock, and if it's not a sock, well, I really don't care. I'm not a freaking fashionista. I don't know what this part is. I just know that it needs to be not boot color, so I used deck tan, which is the only logical color to use for something that is not boot color. Now speaking of the boots, I need to add a little bit of detail to them, and some of the parts of the boots is a darker brown. A good color to use for stuff like this is contrast paint. This Sigor brown, it doesn't cover fully, but it does cover actually really well over darker colors, and it just paints really smoothly. There is something about certain contrast paints that just make them really flow very nicely. Some of them flow too much, some of them don't flow enough at all, but Sigor brown is one that is really easy to use, to add some details to brown objects. I also used some Agrax Earthshade in some of the recessed areas. This is also going to help bring out some of the details that were sculpted on these boots. I want to quickly talk about the sculptors of this model, which is Zenith Studios, and they are a sponsor of this video. Of course, they are a Patreon over on Patreon, and if you want to get any models that look anything remotely like this for yourself to print and paint, you need to go and check out the link that I've left in the description to go and look at their Patreon and perhaps join up. If you join up now using my code, which is Zenith Ground, you will get 30% off on your first sign up. I'm pretty sure that's a great deal, especially for such highly quality model, sculpted model that you can 3D print and paint. They do come pre-supported. I do support my own models, but they do come pre-supported, so if you are worried about supporting them, they are available to be supported already, meaning that you can just print them in most cases, but they do an incredible job of giving you some great renders for you to follow, also some posters that you can maybe print and stick in your collectible area, whatever you want to do with them, maybe use them as your phone background, I don't know. But that is the sponsor of this video. Go and check them out in the description. There is a link for them, and let them know that I sent you. Now moving on to painting the pants, it is a pretty simple job really. We have done most of the work by adding the highlights and shadows when we painted the browns on them. Now all I need to do is go in and paint the metallic buckles that are on there, and also I need to paint the color, the exact same color that I used on her legs, which is a black grey. I'm pretty sure that's the color. If it's not the color I used, well, it is grey and it is not black, but it is close to its black. I painted the belt with those colors, and as well as the straps. I forgot the straps at first, but I realized once almost putting it together that I needed to paint the straps because they all kind of connect up. And even though this color looks so much lighter on the pants, trust me, it's the exact same color. So when you put these parts together, it looks as if the straps are holding everything together, which is, honestly, it fits together so nicely, which I really like. You may not have known what I was doing earlier with this pigment powder. That's because I was speaking about the sponsor while I was doing it. But basically, I'm using this to fill in all of the ouchies, all the sores that she has got from obviously running through very sharp bushes. And I used a little bit of red to paint inside of some of them as well. I didn't want to go overboard with a load of muck and dirt and also putting blood everywhere. I just wanted to try keep it quite tame on this one, to make it look not so freaking ridiculous, because sometimes I feel like I get a bit overboard when it comes to the blood and gore and muck and things like that. Anyway, she does have a bandage on her arm, which obviously means there is a worse ouchie underneath there, and we need to paint this bandage, and so I painted it with, well, you guessed it, deck tan. I then used a bit of skeleton horde, sprayed into the shadows, no care for any of the overspray because no one has time for that, before swiftly moving on to painting the base color of her shirt, which has got to be like a really weird color. I'm not gonna lie, it is a difficult color to reproduce. It's kind of like a turquoise, but it's not really a turquoise either. So how I did this was by using kind of a turquoise and then adding a little bit of white into that color to spray the highlights over those areas that needed the highlights, which kind of made it look like the color, I guess. And if it's not the color, I don't really care. In my eyes, that is the color that I needed it to be. So moving swiftly on to painting the straps, I used the same black grey to paint those straps that are around her shoulders as well, but these are a little bit different because there is a bit more brown leather on these straps, and specifically through the center of the front strap, and also there is some more brown leather on her quiver, which is the word that I forgot to use earlier in the video when I didn't know what the pocket for the arrows was called. Anyway, I used a dark silver to paint any of the little buckles and rivets, as well as her necklace, and then I can now put the arms together onto this model because I'm done with the arms and I can move on to the rest of the accessories and hands and the bow. Now for this bow, there is some markings in it that I needed to stand out, so I figured the best way to do this was to paint the color of the markings first. Once I've done the color of the markings, I will then come back in theory and be able to dry brush the brown color of the actual bow over the top, But before I get to that, I'm going to need to paint the little arrow in the back, the quiver, no, yes, the... I don't know what it's called, I don't even care, but here is a good example of wet blending. You could see that while the paints are still wet, I'm rubbing the lighter colors over the darker colors, and this way it creates a blend, meaning you don't have to airbrush, and it still looks cool. It gives you a nice blend from dark to light, or from one color to the other. Now I'm going to move on to painting this brown, and I'm going to be honest with you, dry brushing it was the worst way. I decided very swiftly that dry brushing was the worst way, and I ended up just using a larger brush and kind of wet brushing, because it wasn't working with the dry brush. It just kept filling in the holes, so I had to go back and repaint them again, and then come back with the wet brush. Anyway, after I've got all of that nicely painted, and you can see the markings, and all the brown areas are done, I can airbrush a little bit of Agrax Earthshade just to tie everything in together and give a little bit of shadows to the shadows, and it helps to make things not look as poo-poo. But I can also paint the strings of the bow using deck tan and paint over that with some skeleton horde, which makes this magical looking string kind of color. I would say it makes a good looking string color, but I'm unsure. It's a thing that I did, and it's tough. We're here now. It has been done. I used some contrast red paint. I can't even remember which one it was, but I used that to paint the insides of the handle of the weapon, and then I moved on to painting this bird, which of course me and Frankie did not know what bird it was until we had figured out that it was a blue jay, and then I just used the references of the image rather than actual references of the bird to paint this one, which just required putting in a little bit of black in some of the areas and also white in also other areas, which then makes it look like a blue jay. The areas that these colors need to go in is pretty freaking specific, and if you just look at the reference image and then paint those things in, it will look roughly like that bird, and it's so small no one cares. Just paint the bird with some whites, blacks and blues and call it a day. I'm moving on to now painting the quiver and the knife that is in the quiver, which is gotta have a little bit of a brown look to it, because I'm sure this is the color of the leather that it was made out of. It can be the only answer to that question. Anyway, I used a reddish kind of brown for this because I didn't want this color to clash too much with anything else on this model, so on its own it has its own entire color, and this way it also ties in with the color that goes around the front strap on her chest. Using Agrax Earthshade in all the time with this. I'm just going to spray it into the shadows, and I'm not really going to spray it really like too much in one area, but I'm making sure that there is a dark spot and a light spot. This will just trick your eye into thinking that it's painted nicely. I'm pretty sure this is not how it's meant to be done, but it is what I do and it works, so maybe try it. Just spray a little bit of washes, the correct color of washes into the areas on some of the parts that you've painted with solid colors, and then just call it a day. Like, everyone will be like, wow bro, you painted so well, look at it, it looks fine. No one will know anything different. Now moving on to painting her face, I'm going to use Magos Purple because I feel like Lara Croft don't care about no makeup, so we ain't going to do any makeup on her. We're just going to put some plumpy flush lips that are a little bit less lip color than skin color, or more lip color. I don't know. I put Magos Purple on her lips so that they weren't freaking too lipsticked up, because that would look weird. And moved on to painting her eyebrows. For the eyebrows, I use a very small brush. I'm pretty sure it's a 5/0. And I used some Sagor brown, and I used a load of brush strokes to paint the eyebrows in. Painting them like solid worms might look stupid, so maybe don't do that. And when you've got the eyebrows painted and they don't look like worms, well then you can put some Magos Purple into the eyes. This is going to help get some of that pinky color that is inside of eyeballs to be there when we paint the whites over it a little bit later. Once that dries, I use a bit of black and I paint around the eyelashes to make the eyelashes stand out. I do it in this order because when I come back with the white of the eyes later, I can tidy up any mistakes that I make. And believe me, you will make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time, and so this is the time I can tidy it up with. And unfortunately, I use highlight skin for the eyes, which comes out of a set of paints, which means when this runs out, I'm gonna have to buy an entire set of paints in order to replace it. And annoyingly, I apparently made this set of paints quite popular, and this means that it's no longer in stock anywhere. Also, it has been taken off of the market, so Good luck to anyone finding this color, and I'm sorry for that, but it is what it is. You can use like an ivory color in its place, but never a pure white, because if you use an actual white, it's gonna look stupid. I want to just mention though, with the eyes, what I normally do is thin the white quite a bit, and I will paint multiple layers, and I will kind of leave the edges a little bit darker than the center, and that kind of helps to shape the eyes a little bit. I will take a bit of gloss paint and paint that over her lips. While that is drying, I'll then move on to painting the irises of these eyes. And for this, I'm going to start out with a Cygor Brown. Because it flows really well, I need to be careful not to let this get out of hand, but it flows well enough for me to shape these irises quite nicely. Then, using a little bit more of a yellower brown, I will paint in the center of those irises and leave just a thin little line of dark brown around the edge, and I will make a couple of strokes on the inside of those to make it look a little bit more like there is something going on. Then, taking some black, I can paint some perfect little pupils into the center of those irises, making them look like actual eyeballs. I then use a bit of Magos purple in the corners of the eyes to help to make them look a bit more rounded. And then this is the only time I use white, and this is to add a specular highlight into the eyes, using just one on the one side and one tiny little even smaller one on the other side. I can then put some varnish over and move on to painting the glasses. Luckily, my next door neighbor happened to have this sheet of just perfectly sized round stickers, which annoyingly just works perfectly. If you can't find them, I'm sorry, you're gonna struggle painting these, but this works really well for me. I can now stick a sticker on each side of the glasses and then use a gold paint and spray that over the top of the frames, and then when I pull off the stickers, it will make obviously a nice masking situation so that I don't have horrible looking lines around the outside. Trust me, I painted like 3 of these glasses before I realized I needed to find something circular and small enough to fit there. The next step for me will be painting a little bit of dry brushing on the hair. I use a brown for this at first, and then I remembered that to make the hairs look somewhat realistic, I don't know why this works, but using a copper color and dry brushing that very carefully over the hairs will make them glisten, kind of like hair is supposed to glisten in the light, and it makes it look a lot cooler. I can then put the head on this model, but there is more things than just the head, and of course that means the glasses and the fringe, and then I can call this model done. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it gave you some insight into how to paint Lara Croft, or any 3D printed model, or even any model for that case or matter. Now, of course, we do know that most people like to wash things when they're on the toilet, and if you are on the toilet, well, wash your hands, otherwise that's not cool of you. But what would be cool is if when you're done washing your hands, you click the like button and then maybe click subscribe, because we're trying to get to 100 million, thousand, gabillion subscribers. Of course, if you like this video and you know someone who might like this video, maybe share this video with them. That could be your gran. I don't really discriminate, it could be anyone. And I want to say a massive thank you for watching this video, and also a huge thank you to my Patreons for supporting me over on Patreon and keeping the lights blinding my eyeballs. If you are interested in this model, then go check out the link in the description to go and check out the sponsor, and while you're down there, check out my Patreon too. This is a great time for me to tell you that if you didn't like anything you saw in this video, I don't care, and you should probably off.